50, more than half are companies that are less than 20 years old. We have in the past had the ability to allow companies to grow from nowhere. And this is the stories of Infosys, it's the story of all our IT companies, HCL. These are really first generation entrepreneur companies. So we have had the ability to do this, and we need to ensure that we can do more of this again and again and across different sectors, not just limited to IT. Then there's the problem of infrastructure. This is a huge deficit. It impacts performance of our industrial sector, our competitiveness, our exports, our agri-productivity. And I did mention DMIC, and I do believe that projects like this Delhi-Mumbai corridor and the 7 cities that it will build along it, 7 new cities, is truly historic. But we need more such projects. And in fact, there are 3 other such corridors that are being envisaged. But we need to get going quicker, have them see the light of day, because these will become the building blocks of our growth in the future. And we need to give all necessary technical and financial support to get these off the ground. So I'd like to just flag a few priorities. So firstly, dealing with food inflation, which calls for a quantum jump in food productivity, straightening kinks in our agri-supply, so that the distribution and warehousing of the food that is produced actually reaches our markets, reduce wastage. Then we need to also, given that there is a growing demand for protein and mineral-rich food items in the country, have a second green revolution that focuses not just on fruits and vegetables, but meat and fish and egg and milk products, because this is what is driving inflation up. We need an effective cold chain for food, and in fact also in the health space for vaccines. Second, we need to reduce the cost of doing business in India. We must usher in a comprehensive goods and service tax. This was in the Congress manifesto, the last manifesto. To be fair, they've really tried. We still don't have a goods and service tax because the opposition parties didn't sign up to it. And all estimates show that a goods and service tax will add 2% to the GDP of the country. How many measures can you think anywhere and anywhere in the world that one measure can add 2% to the GDP of the country? And it could do it in the space of a year or 2 of introduction. That is what India has, the hidden gems, which we aren't able to take forward. We really do need this one common market for tax in India. The third area is speedier implementation of large infrastructure projects. This calls for a lot of action on many fronts. And while the Cabinet Committee on Investments has done a commendable job by clearing several large projects, we need to now see that these actually go into production. Fourth, the administration of our tax system in the country, which really does require mindset change. We have actions that are driven by a single point agenda of maximizing resources today, and it's understandable. I mentioned how the fiscal deficit is an issue. So unfortunately, as a result, we are always drawn to litigation. Unreasonable demands on one side, and therefore response is litigation rather than to pay. We need clearer laws. Over 70% of litigation cases in India involve the government, either as a petitioner or a respondent. And interestingly, it is the center and the states that together account for 70% of the 3 crore cases that are pending in various courts in India. I mean, you would wonder how much space is there left for common citizens like you and I, and we go in with other matters. This, in effect, is what makes the government the largest litigant in the country. And the question here is, when the government makes for 2/3 of all court cases, then what is it that we require in order to clear the courts so that the common man's grievance can also be heard? Fifth, the whole issue of energy security, where we need to, of course, follow through on our diversification strategy in terms of sources of energy, renewable energy, wind and solar in particular. And we have the good fortune of being able to use both these resources as part of our energy basket. In fact, I should tell you that at Davos, pretty much 1/3 of all the conversations that were happening there this year were around areas to do with environment and new sources of energy. So it is very much a global subject today, very critical for India. However, we also need to accept that coal is still the mainstay of our energy mix, whether we like it or not. We have to have coal in order to produce power. And therefore, evolve policies that help us tap this resource. So we have the 4th or 5th largest coal resources in the world, but we went through an era which I like to call the go-go era, where everything just happened. It didn't matter about rules, regulations, everything was being broken, everything that needed to happen happened, and it was not necessarily right or within the regulatory framework. And then we swung to a no-go era, when nothing was possible, and all coal mining came to a stop. And that created a huge spurt also in our imports. So the current account deficit problem also saw this aspect, the fact that coal imports went up from what was typically 6 billion to almost 20 billion almost overnight. So we have to continue to mine coal, and the answer has to be is we have to do it in a regulated and environment-friendly way. And it is possible to do that. Many countries like Germany and others that are very strict on the environmental front mine coal, but they do it in an environment-friendly way. It's a little costlier maybe than the way we do it, but it is possible in the long run to do it in a way that we don't destroy our environment, our forests, or indeed the lands where this mining happens. Sixth, land is essential for industrial expansion, and our land-related policies need to ensure that this resource is available, that it's available for, yes, for agriculture, but also for industry on a long-term basis and with certainty. So one of the most important legislations that has come is the Land Acquisition Act. It is seen as hugely unfriendly for business in its desire to achieve transparency, which is critical, absolutely critical. Unfortunately, it's the view that is now quite commonly accepted is that it will take 5 to 6 years to acquire land. So which industry is going to embark on this process when you're wanting to set up large industry? Government's answer is that we're going to give you large NIMS, the National Manufacturing Zones, which is true, where these problems will be taken care of and you can come there and set up your businesses. But big business tends to want to set up near sources of raw material or near where its factories already exist and expand therein. This is not going to be easy. Seventh, allocation of natural resources, of course, have been a subject of intense discussion. And the Supreme Court ruling, in fact, mentions that auction cannot be the only mechanism. It is actually a pretty good open system when it's auction, but it's not the only mechanism. And in fact, the answer really has to be a transparent, predictable system which has a justifiable balance between revenue optimization and socio-economic development objectives. And of course, rules need to be followed, action taken promptly when rules are broken, and we need regulatory frameworks. So I keep coming back to this. What are the regulatory frameworks? The laws, yes, but also the way we execute on those laws, and where we have independent regulators. How are they functioning? How are they staffed? How do they run? And what mission do they have as they go forward? And the mission has to be, you want a sustainable industry in the long run. You want to rule for your consumers in the long run too. So what I mean by this is it's very easy to rule in favor of a consumer and give you free service, free power, free water, free anything, right? But what does that mean for the company that is providing that in the long run? It's going to be dead. So we need a vision that takes us to a balance which allows for a properly priced product, which enables industry to grow and invest on the one hand, and on the other, to give us access to these products in a price and cost-efficient way. Businesses require an environment of predictability that can only be ensured if there's sanctity of contract, or what is often called rule of law, stability in the tax regime, applicability of legislations prospectively, so that we have certainty going forward. And as you know, there have been many developments in the past where one or more of these principles has been violated. So we need to take, and government indeed has taken corrective measures in some of these cases, but this unfortunately has been a big knock on the confidence that investors have, not just foreign investors, Indian investors as well, in terms of the sanctity of contract in the country. So our businesses have a very long history of engagement with communities around us. Many understand what is good for the community is also good for business. Entrepreneurs need to be treated fairly and with respect. And clearly there should be a collective effort involving both government and civil society that is aimed at realizing the true potential of India. And in fact, I embarked on one such effort. It's a very preliminary effort. I'm sure it's only going to have mixed results because it's very far-reaching. But I have to mention this because there are two members of this council I set up called the Inclusive Governance Council, where we are very fortunate to have your chair, Dr. Qureshi, as a member of this council, and Malvika Rai as a member of this council. And the purpose of this council is to bring people like them, people who are in industry, people who are in civil society, and people with experience in administration and government together onto one platform to work out the agendas together for the country's growth. Because we are too often speaking at cross purposes, and too often we don't listen to each other. I don't believe we can ever come to one view. It's not easy to always agree on everything, but at least we can respect the view of the other side and find solutions which enable us to progress in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, all we want is what's good for the country. Now, finally, before I come to the close of my address, I'd like to just point out that while it's clearly necessary to address the structural and the economic problems that we face, we also need to recognize the social issues. We need to protect what is the pluralism that is India, to ensure that we have an inclusive India in all we do, to respect the diversity, to know that every person's ideas are to be heard. Implement or not to implement can be a separate matter, but we must at least listen and give everyone their due. I'd particularly like to highlight the role of women in society, yes, but for all of you here, women in business. We really do need to embrace the cause of safety of women in the workplace. And in doing that, clearly, this year has been quite significant in our country in terms of both the legislations we have seen and the very high decibel noise in the press, but also, I believe, the interest to embrace what is good. And we would really have lost a year if we did not translate this into actions in the right direction. So there are now policies. In fact, Malvika herself was involved in something we put out at FICCI, which is to do with women's safety in the workplace. But it isn't just about physical safety. It is about creating an enabling environment for all to progress. Because an organization that creates an environment that respects diversity enables everybody in the organization to rise to their true potential. It is about being a meritocracy, but affording everyone the opportunity to deliver to their full potential. And as we look at this, I think we also need to question, are daughters as eligible as sons to run businesses in India? The day I see a board which says Mehra and daughters and not Mehra and sons, I know we'd have made that passage. So may the best person succeed, man or woman. We have moved the needle in many multinational companies, in banks, but owner-run companies have a long way to go. For each of you who go out to conquer the world, there is no place better to be than in India. The experience, the contribution you will make, the satisfaction from that engagement, I believe will drive you to greater heights. I never regretted returning from Harvard Business School in 1982. Having had the opportunity to stay in the US, many thought I was mad, but I have never regretted it. And I'm sure neither will any of you as you build your fortunes and futures here. So I will end with a favorite saying of mine, that is Maha Stavira Sangarakshita. To know what we do not know is the beginning of wisdom. So I don't know what the future holds for us. I barely know what it holds for us tomorrow. Indeed, what the elections mean for us next year or whenever. What I do know is that the trajectory we embark on is ours to make. Thank you. Can I say again?
Thank you, Professor Popley. In fact, I fully subscribe to your view that it has been a very vibrant lecture, very thought-provoking and gripping. I could very much feel this while sitting in the audience. We'll now have a few questions. Members may kindly raise their hands. But before we begin, please start with your brief introduction and keep your question very brief. Can we have some hands for the questions, please? Professor Sengupta, please.
Thank you. Ma'am, I think it was a very inspiring session, and our students have immensely benefited by the general awareness talk that you have given them, and they need it very badly. But I have some other type of question to you. Do you still believe you're a lonely woman at the top in terms of position in a man's world? Or do you think the time has come in India and in the corporate world that such questions are not relevant anymore?
Such questions are not relevant anymore. And what a wonderful place to be. So certainly not in the business world. I would be facetious if I said that India was where it needed to be in every layer of society. We are not. But certainly in the business world, and I think we've shown the way. We have now in India 30% of the bank's CEOs are women. It's one of the highest in the world. The highest, why one of? The highest in the world. It is to be celebrated. We have many of our companies, again, largely multinational, and professionals there have a good mix of men and women. We don't have enough women yet in senior management. And we are horrible in our statistic on women in corporate boards, which is at 3%, which is one of the lowest in the world. And I think some of that has to do with the fact, I know some of that is to do with the fact that most of our companies here are indeed family owned and run. And I would hope that the tokenism of putting the mother and sister on the board is not going to be the response to the legislation that has come, which requires now one woman on a board of, they haven't quite defined which companies, but it will at a minimum be listed companies. So we do have to work at it. But I would like to believe that for the companies that women choose to join, by and large, the environment is one where it isn't a struggle. And I should tell you, I didn't think even I struggled when I joined in '82, and that is, to some extent, the beauty of India. If you join, as I did, a professional company which has people who are by and large literate in an urban environment, So, in the space that I joined, the good fortune we have in the country is that we are very diverse. So, I was maybe as much of an oddity as the guy who was in fact, we used to sit in a big sort of room, who sat next to me, who came from Chennai and, refused to go out beer drinking and would come in the morning with chandan on his forehead, as indeed, so everyone made fun of each other in a friendly and happy way, because the diversity, if you look, our different eating habits, someone's vegetarian, someone's non-vegetarian, someone drinks, someone won't play golf, someone goes to bed early. So you have in that, fortunately, as a woman, you don't stand out for the fact that you won't go to a pub on Thursday, as would be a problem if you were in the US, and that you're not prepared to play golf on weekends, and that you don't swear, in four-letter words at every drop of the hat. So that diversity is in itself a big advantage for us here. And the second big advantage, which I certainly benefited from, was the family structure. And not my mother, my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law would fly down and come down to support and help me when I had to travel. So make sure you marry the right guy, yeah, and has the right mother-in-law. Yeah. So.
Okay. So crisply answered and yet so beautifully. Okay, we'll take the next question now. Dr. Qureshi, please. Himanshu? Dr. Qureshi, please.
Thank you, ma'am. You spoke brilliantly. What clarity, what insights. But one comment of yours intrigued me. When you said when China vacates the export space, India will have an opportunity. The question which came to my mind was that if China is going to vacate it voluntarily, there must be a good reason for them to do so. Therefore, walking into that space, how much sense will that make? Secondly, China was able to capture the export market because of very cheap labor. Our labor, in any case, is more expensive. So how will we step into their shoes?
Okay. So you have to look at why China is vacating this space, and voluntarily. And it's vacating it because the model that they grew by was really a model of huge infrastructure spend. And beyond a point now, they can't